Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. We'll be talking today about Middle East tensions. US and Iran have been going on, especially for the past 10 days. Things have really hit a high point. Now, in Iran itself, it is the second day of protests, which are in turn adding pressure on the country's leaders after they came out and admitted that their armed forces had accidentally shot down a Ukrainian passenger plane, killing all 176 passengers on board. Now, this plane crashed just hours after Iran had launched a missile attack on US forces in Iraq last week in retaliation to the US assassination of Iran's top commander Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad. On Saturday evening, a memorial was held at Tehran's Amir Kabir University to honor those who had been killed on this flight. And soon after, this turned into a demonstration, which journalists have said was attended by hundreds of students. And these students were chanting slogans, "Death to liars," demanding resignations and accountability of those responsible for making the call to shoot down the Ukrainian commercial jet. Now, during these protests, we've seen President Trump come out and tweet quite avidly supporting the protesters and warning Iranian government not to hurt them, which is ironic in itself considering the US maximum pressure campaign that has imposed sanctions since President Trump withdrew from the 2018 from the Iran nuclear deal, which has harmed essentially the same Iranians right now protesting. So, meanwhile, world leaders, we are seeing are scrambling for de-escalation efforts, which Iran has signaled that it favors. Now, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani, he's met with the Emir of Qatar, he's met with Pakistan's foreign minister, and conversations on the phone have taken place with other world leaders in terms of de-escalation. So, is de-escalation really possible? And what kind of a truce are we looking at between the two arch enemies, the US and Iran? Well, let's find out from our guests what they think about these developments. Let me introduce who we have today. Mr. Farshid Ariyan is joining us. He's an Iranian activist right now in London. We also have with us Mr. Mehrdad Khonsari, a former Iranian diplomat joining us from Spain. And also Dr. Ahmed Rushdi, a senior foreign policy advisor to the Speaker Office at Iraqi Parliament, joining us today from Istanbul. Welcome to all three of you. If I could start with you, Mr. Mehrdad, about these recent developments. The protests taking place in Iran right now, hundreds on the streets, security is on high alert. And then President Trump comes out and starts tweeting that he supports the protesters, the brave people of Iran. What do you make of President Trump's statements coming out at a time like this?
Well, I think President Trump's statement is in line with his previous comments and the tenets of his, his position regarding protesters in Iran. It's a continued expression of support for them. The fact is that no one expected the protests in Iran to take such a turn so shortly after the assassination of General Soleimani, in the sense that the regime had galvanized public opinion in a completely different direction, which was completely upset by the downing of the Ukrainian plane and the terrible way in which the Iranian government sort of handled the PR side of this situation. So no one is really surprised by President Trump's tweets or by the language that he has employed, but one is hugely surprised at the way in which the Iranian regime has so badly handled a situation that has brought about these demonstrations, which were expected to happen once the heat of Soleimani's death had gone by, but nobody expected it to happen as soon as it did and when it did.
That's an interesting point. But first, Mr. Ariyan, if I could get you on this. President Trump's support is coming at a time where Iranian protests had just died down. We saw that in November, after price hikes in fuel and other subsidies being taken away, that there was a massive outpouring of Iranians on the streets demanding that these be reversed. Now, of course, sanctions have really hurt the Iranian economy. But at a time like this, do you think President Trump's support is going to hurt the Iranian protesters?
No, I do not think so. I had an interview with you at the time of the protests, at the height of the protests, in about 50 days ago sometimes, and we could realize that 1,500 people were killed, and something about 15,000 up to, 10,000. It's quite difficult to give the numbers, as I mentioned to your colleague. But the reality is that Iranian people have asked international community to help them for such a long time. I mean, today, Taraneh Ali Dosti, one of the famous Iranian actress, and the other Iranian director called for this, and because she said that we have been taken hostage in this country. And at the time that Obama had this deal with Iran, people of Iran at demonstration, they had the slogan that, are you with them, Obama? Are you with them or with us? Mm-hmm. And they have asked international community to support them. I think this is exactly as Mr. Khonsari said. It was in line with what have been said and asked before. I'm not saying that foreign countries should interfere with our affairs, but that reaction that Mr. Trump has said, it was that because Iranian kept saying to U.S. government, what are you doing? You just say they are supporting us, you're giving us free internet, you're supporting us, but you're not. But what I'm trying to say is we should realize what has happened here. We should go into the discussion of what happened, the fabricated lies, that people are tired, and they use any possibility, any reason to come into the street to show them that they don't want them anymore. This is what has happened. Right. This is the reality. We are talking about 3 days of lying, and then said that there was an error has happened. 176 people were killed simply, and that has had a long track record. This is why Mr. Khamenei has actually condemned U.S. bombing or shutdown of Iranian plane many years ago. Right. So what I'm trying to say, this is what the reaction and this confrontation should end somewhere.
And the Iranians, they went from unprecedented support when Soleimani's funeral procession took place, those 3 days. 5 million by some counts were out on the streets of Tehran alone. And then you see this happening, where immediately this sentiment went to anti-government again in a span of few days. How do you see this? Did the Iranian government miss a very crucial opportunity with the funeral of Qasem Soleimani, where everyone was together on the same page here?
The problem is that Iranian policy is made by various people, and nobody is in the center of these policies. I mean, we have got different powers and hidden governments by Sepah or in the Revolutionary Guard. We have got many central powers in our country. Unfortunately, this propaganda, which is exactly reminds us of Nazi fascist propaganda of, Germany, is there always. They have the whole TV and the propaganda machine and many different sorts of media. They actually can exaggerate the people. You mentioned 5 million. I don't know how did you get that number. They use everything to cover and to show that there are a lot of support for them. But we shouldn't forget that 50 days ago, they killed 1,500 people in the street of Iran. Everybody in 170 cities and villages. And then arrested 10,000 people, and nobody, the whole community, exactly like 80s, when they had this mass killings of in the prison of the people and the young people and students and people who were against them, and nobody said anything. What I'm trying to say, what they have is only mobile phone to cover their demonstration, while Iranian use any sort of mix-up, exactly like what they did with this shooting down of this plane. They have the whole media. People came into the street, were gathered from everywhere. If you just look at the streets, they couldn't be more than 1 million. Even if they were 5 million, imagine. We're talking about 75 million of Iranian people who have said repeatedly, in many sort of uprising, that we do not want this administration. We do not want this so-called Islamic Republic, which has never been a republic. Never. And
So there's this sentiment, anti-government sentiment here, and what seemed to have been sort of brought down a notch has started escalating again. Mr. Khonsari, is this what kind of a risk does this pose to the Iranian government right now? I mean, there are members of parliament who are demanding resignations. They're coming out and speaking. These protests are again continuing, and with the U.S. now hell-bent on taking into account now even the lives of those who are at risk or who are being killed by the government, what do you make of their future?
Well, I think that 2020 offers a very bleak prospect for the Iranian regime. First and foremost, they are confronted with huge economic problems, which is the bedrock of the kind of mass protests that have been taking place in Iran, not just a few months ago, but going back to well over a year. With the government totally incapable of offering the kind of solution that would offer any kind of relief to the general public, there is no reason to think that these demonstrations will not happen again and again, no matter how harshly they are put down. Of course, the government, for its part, is determined to continue, crushing these in order to survive. But they have parliamentary elections coming up on the 21st of February. They had hoped that with galvanizing public opinion for the death of General Soleimani, that they might be able to have a sizable turnout and interpret that as some sort of a continued support for the regime. That has now been shattered as a result of what's been happening in the last few days and the downing of the Ukrainian jet. So the prospects are quite bleak. It's quite obvious that the government is incapable of offering any solution to the economic problems. So long as the U.S. sanctions are enforced, it's obvious that the U.S. sanctions cannot be removed unless there is some form of a compromise with the United States. And you cannot reach a compromise with the United States if you have no dialogue. And the Supreme Leader is banning all kinds of dialogue with the United States. So he has essentially placed himself in an untenable position that sooner or later will backfire on him and his regime.
Now, Mr. Ariyan, a critical that Mr. Khonsari has picked up on, that if there is no dialogue, there is absolutely no future of these sanctions being lifted. Now, the U.S. Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, he's come out and said that President Trump is willing to sit down and discuss, without any preconditions, a new way forward. Even though we're seeing President Trump, the way he tweets, talking about he really doesn't care if there is any deal is achieved or not with Iran. But what we're seeing from Tehran is this continuous sort of refusal to hold any talks with Washington unless sanctions are lifted first. This seems almost like a situation where who's going to, a game of chicken, who's going to duck first. What do you make of this? How long can President Rouhani keep this stance, considering the kind of protests that are once again unfolding in Iran?
Yes, we should realize after the elections, as Mr. Khonsari mentioned, Iranian administration are facing with the lack of the budget. They don't have anybody. They cannot sell any oil. They do not have any revenue and income at the moment. So in a couple of months, even I had an interview about the price, the change price of the petrol in Iran with you, and I mentioned they do not have practically enough revenue to maintain their not only their ambitions, rather than their normal day-to-day life, and they are not willing to cut any organization's budget, which is unnecessary, which belongs to the interfering with the in Lebanon and in Iraq. At the same time, they do not have any income. So we should realize they have been in this situation, is a deadlock. And as Mr. Trump said, he said he's going to do something which is worse than war, and it is worse than a war. That is how Iranian administration have become very aggressive. Right. Everything started killing and demonstration in front of the U.S. embassy and targeting U.S. interests in Iraq. They have been actually in a fight with each other for a long time. Everybody knows that. The problem is that they want to get out of this, and they do not know how to break this deadlock. And this is the reality. So confrontation in order to show U.S. government that they can do something rather than sitting down and talk. As you mentioned about the suggestion about unconditional or preconditional talks, they know that it is. They want them not to use their capability and interference in the Middle East, and they do not want to come back to the table because they know they have to lose. So that have been their way. I mean, hostage taking since the beginning of the revolution. The way that they have even taken people hostage in our country. They have killed more than millions because of their mismanagement, their intention to export the revolution, and their ideology at the moment. So they are not willing to think about any other benefits which is for the benefit of the country rather than their own ambitions. Right. In that line, we do not have any way out rather than one party goes back to the agreement. And the agreement, they said that we didn't break it, United States did it, but we shouldn't forget they send out the same ballistic missile writing we should destroy Israel on that missile after the agreement. So they are not taking responsibility for their actions, as they haven't been taking responsibility for any action in the last couple of at least month, and they are not admitting that how much they killed people for the rightful demonstration. As a matter of fact, they did nothing. They had no weapon, and they went to the streets to say that we want a better life. So they are not taking responsibility. There's not any scrutiny in Iran. Iranian leader is there in more than 30 years without any election. So the people have no other way. Mm-hmm. They have tried not to put the country in, to create an environment for the war. Iranian people, they do not want war.
Let me bring in another voice here while we talk about the kind of Iranian protests taking place and the sentiment against the government. Also, Dr. Ahmed Rushdi, your opinion on the U.S. story, on their take on why they took out Qasem Soleimani in Iraq, the kind of evidence it seems now, especially from Mark Esper's statement, that there didn't seem to be evidence right now, even though he's saying President Trump did seem to have good reason to make this call. What is the reaction within Iraq now?
Well, on an official basis, the Iraqi authorities actually didn't have a real response about what happened, because there are so many things. Number one, it's a caretaker government, so it has no authorities, real authorities, about the future of Iraq right now. The second thing is that we all know that the parliament is already has ethnic groups, let's say Sunni, Shia, and Kurd, and we all know that in the session, actually only the Shia presented with a few Sunnis, 2 to 3, 4 MPs, and for the Kurds, no one. It's actually only 1 or 2. So the third thing is, which is also a very important issue, is that we all know that the problems that with the Iranian intervention is that we don't have a real image about any progress happening in Iraq since 16 years with this intervention. So all those things actually accumulated in the face of the Iraqis. So there is no real response about what's happened. So the American issue, I think President Trump needs to image himself as a hero in front of the Americans. We all know that elections will happen in November. So he needs to say very good in the international relations, and also fighting terrorism and make success in fighting terrorism. So although I think all those issues managed to push for the decision of killing General Diplomat.
No, but Dr. Rushdi, the initial reaction, you say it's a caretaker government, but Prime Minister al-Mahdi came out very strongly condemning the actions, a violation of Iraqi sovereignty with the US airstrike that killed Qasem Soleimani. So obviously their sentiments, even if you're saying it's a caretaker government, so they really don't, have that kind of same priority or standing as an actual elected government, but it should still mean something representing the voice of the people, because like you said, the understanding is that they are no longer conducive to Iraq. Those 16 years they have been present have not really done anything good for them.
Yes, but let's see, the other picture is that the Iraqi government, the Iraqi government didn't manage to respond to the Iranian rockets. They didn't make any response to that. So it shows you that eventually the Iraqi government is very weak. They are in between. They cannot manage to take a real sovereignty decision because they know the impacts of the Iranian and they know the impacts of the Americans as well. And let us not forget is that President Trump was in Iraq to be inside economic sanctions. So all those things managed to say to the Iraqis is that actually the caretaker government is already a very weak government.
Okay.
But
Doctor.
let us speak about the consequences of this of those issues. All those things happen have an impact on the demonstrations in Tahrir Square and also in the Southern Governorate, which is already in fire now.
Dr. Rushdi, thank you so much for your time. Very quickly, if I could come to you, Mr. Khonsari, we're running out of time here. I quickly want to get your opinion on the kind of, we are seeing conversations going on with President Hassan Rouhani visiting, a meeting with the visiting Emir of Qatar, with the Pakistan's foreign minister talking about de-escalation is the only situation. Do you feel that even though President Rouhani has come out and said that we have agreed that the only solution to this is de-escalation and we need everyone to be a part of this dialogue, do you feel like this is a possibility that this, despite what Tehran has said, that we're not going to, that the sanctions will have to be lifted for this negotiation to happen? Do you think this will happen, the conversation between US and Iran?
I think that the Iranian government really doesn't have too many options other than try to get back-channel talks restarted. That means using the Qataris, the Omanis, other trusted and tested mediatory elements that they have used in the past to try to not just de-escalate, but more importantly, try to get the United States to make some sort of a opening gesture so that they can enter into new talks for reaching a new and broad agreement. Now, the discussions that they had held with the French president going back to last summer indicated that there had been some broad points of agreement agreed to in the past, and it was hoped that during the course of the UN General Assembly that there might be some meetings between President Rouhani and President Trump, which did not take place. But I think the foundation of the agreement there's more or less agreed to. So it's a matter of trying to get these back channels operating in a way that can produce results now, in the sense that escalation will lead to nowhere. It doesn't do anybody any good. It creates more mayhem in the region, and I think that there's a fair chance. Obviously, the supreme leader in Iran has been quite vociferously against this, but when facing reality of protests on the street due to
so it seems like they're really backed into it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Mr. Khonsari, Mr. Ariyan, and of course, Dr. Rushdi, thank you for joining us and adding your opinions here to this conversation about how this peace will be achieved between the US and Iran. With this, we'll take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. We'll be talking about the kind of escalations we have been seeing the past months across the line of control. But what is more worrying is the statements coming from the new Indian Army Chief, General M.M. Narawane, who has also earlier in his tenure talked about preemptive strikes, but more recently over the weekend he came out and said that if he got the orders from the Indian Parliament, he would go ahead and take back Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the Pakistan's media wing of the military forces has responded to this, highlighting that this is the kind of belligerent rhetoric that we have seen from the Indian Army Chief in his effort to stay in the headlines, promoting India's jingoistic media. Now, this statement, of course, is not to be taken lightly because it comes at a time where there are already been very heavy tensions this past year in 2019 and now starting to 2020. It seems like this will continue. Meanwhile, what we're seeing in Jammu and Kashmir is a continued communication blackout, curfews everywhere. It's been over 5 months now. And at the same time, India all over has been taken over by civilian protests against the very controversial Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, which essentially, with the national registrations of citizens exercise, disenfranchises Muslims within India. Now, to get the agenda behind these kind of activities, whether this is a means of distraction at a time where India is embroiled in its own domestic conflicts, let's introduce our guests who will shed some light on this latest. We have with us Major General Ijaz Awan, a defense analyst joining us from Islamabad. We also have Lieutenant General Ghulam Mustafa, a defense analyst joining us from Lahore. And from Islamabad, we have Mr. Hassan Akbar, an analyst from the Jinnah Institute. Welcome to all three of you. Lieutenant General Ghulam Mustafa, I'd like to begin with you with this latest statement. How do you respond to India's new Army Chief statement?
I think there are 2 or 3 developments that we need to understand. One is that the Brahman Zionism, that is the extreme rightist Hindu mindset. They don't even consider their own fellow Hindus as humans. They consider there's a megalomania which has caught up the entire Brahman Zionism. And the agents they have brought forward as likes of Modi, they're the ones who have been brought up over a period of time and now they are in control. They have kind of a historical baggage and they feel that the Muslims who have ruled them, in fact, Muslims made India what India is today. And but for Muslims, it would have been the kind of princely states or whatever. Now that is what they are trying to undo, not realizing that if they want to undo that, they're going to undo India. And that is what is happening. What they've done is they have saffronized their armed forces. First they brought in this Mr. Bipin Rawat, who was number 4. First time he was picked up as from number 4, made the Chief Army Staff. And we have been hearing all kind of talk that he's been making and the kind of action that they took against Pakistan. And he thought that surgical strike dramas will be sold and maybe the media may have bought it, but internationally nobody bought that game that he was trying. He was elevated to the rank of, not the rank, but the appointment of Chief of Defense Staff. Now with that, they actually have brought the Indian Armed Forces as part of that Brahman Zionism narrative. Now that is what we must understand. But the new Army Chief is operating within that. He is operating within that as the spokesperson of the Brahman Zionism and the megalomania that has caught up all of them. Pakistan needs to be careful because this kind of a mindset, which has now created a problem in Kashmir for the last 5 months, and now in India, they have this now to cover up all this.
So and Pakistan has to be careful. With that, we come to you, Major General Ijaz Awan. Do you see the same way how General Ghulam Mustafa has highlighted that this is the Brahmin Zionism agenda? Now the military, the Indian military is also becoming a part of it. I mean, would you react to it the same way?
Look, let's be very, very realistic. India is a very established democracy and their military or CDS or the Army Chief cannot have a policy which has a departure or which departs from the directions of the political government. So Narendra Modi and Amit Shah, well, they are, of course, very assertive and they are jingoistic in their style. That is all right. But militarily, I don't give it much credence for one reason, that with the given level of disturbances all over India, and that's what's going on in Kashmir, Indian Army is not in a position to get into any misadventure because their rare area of security and disturbances in the country would not be manageable should they undertake a military adventure against Pakistan, because Kashmir for sure would not be in their control because they cannot suppress the population and fight equally strong and professional army on the border. So I think it is more of a military rhetoric since there is a change of command. The old army chief has been elevated to the position of CDS, and the new army chief, once he has assumed office, to address to the army and to establish his position and credibility in the army, he is making such overtures and statements. But I don't think there is any real threat to Pakistan with regards to security. No large-scale mobilization of armed forces has taken place. No forward movement of troops has been placed. No logistic dumping in the forward areas has been carried out, which is an indication and which is much needed for undertaking any military offensive. So I think it is more of a military rhetoric and nothing more than that.
So then that begs the question, Mr. Hassan, Akbar, let me come to you for your take on this. Then what is the point, I mean, of the Indian Army chief coming out at a time where there are high tensions across the LOC? And not only that, but India is embroiled in these massive protests where thousands of civilians are out challenging the BJP government's decisions in the past few months, especially when it comes to the Citizen Amendment Act. But, I mean, does it make him stronger? Does it get him that kind of support he's looking for? I mean, what was the point of him making this statement?
I think there are two simultaneous things that have happened in the Indian military. In the last decade, we have seen a shift in the politicization of the Indian military, which is a dangerous trend. The Indian Army never used to make political statements or get involved in political rhetoric. But over the last decade, that has changed, starting with General V.K. Singh. And now, with the new General Bipin Rawat taking on a very political position of CDS, Chief of Defense Staff, and General Navarane, who was his junior, subsequently now becoming the Indian Army Chief, I think I agree with General Awan that he wants to show to his rank and file that he has, a vision for the Indian Army. That he has he's taking the threat from Pakistan or, creating this imaginary, because the Indian Army, let's not forget, has for many years relied on this concept of two-front war. In many ways, this is imaginary, creating an imaginary threat of a war with both Pakistan and India simultaneously. And the idea behind that for the Indian Army has been to get more arms and ammunition and more money for procurements for the Indian Army. So in this particular context also, he's constantly talking about collusion or the threat from China and Pakistan colluding together. I think it's a setup for getting more money and better resources for his own arms and to separate his role from the CDS role. So there are clearly political motivations behind this. However, let's not forget that subsequently we've seen, how fascist governments like Narendra Modi's often use neighbors or outside threats or create outside threats through false flag, etc., to divert attention from domestic troubles and to rally citizenry which may be criticizing them because of their failures in governance, economics, etc., to create nationalistic fervor. So that threat is very real. And in the event of some kind of false flag operation, I think it's very worrying that a senior police officer in Jammu and Kashmir, Devendra Singh, who has been awarded the presidential medal, has been arrested with militants. He was traveling with militants. I think it speaks. This is the same person who was involved earlier with
This is the person
Mumbai
that Afzal Guru put out and said that he was the person behind him taking those terrorists when the Mumbai Parliament attack took place.
So this is a very worrying development. They were, intelligence reports suggest that they were moving towards Delhi for Republic Day parade. If it's true, I think it's a very serious, a very serious issue which Pakistan should raise at the highest level. So I think given this, there is a political environment in which we're operating as well. And while, I agree that the deployments are not such that India can take any large scale misadventure across the line of control, irrespective of their rhetoric, I think they will be open to the idea of some kind of skirmish, again, to divert attention from the very real troubles that this government has created for itself within India.
Okay. Now, this is worrying, General Ghulam. Mustafa, if I could get your take on this, because we, as you explained, that this is part of a very sort of fascist agenda, the Brahmin Zionist agenda here, bringing the military also in its fold. And what Hassan Akbar said, that, it is rare and it is unprecedented that now the Indian military, which has been, largely not very political, is becoming political. But what we've also seen within India, the former Indian Home Minister, P. Chidambaram, he's come out and said this time and again. He's talked about that we've already lost Jammu and Kashmir because of the kind of siege that has been laid to it for the past 5 months alone. This, whether it is for securing his better equipment and resources for his army, or it is for sort of distracting from the kind of turmoil India is seeing, it still compounds the problem here in Jammu and Kashmir, especially with this development of Davinder Singh being arrested.
Ayza, we must understand the whole thing and put it in a larger frame that I was trying to place. Brahman Zionism, claiming to be the most dominant force in India, they have taken action. And those actions that are persisting with, like the CAA and the other laws that they have passed. Look at, I've heard some of the BJP lawmakers speak, and they're really, it's terrifying. How could these people talk like that? And then look at what they have done to Kashmir. If you put all this together in that overall framework, then these things start making sense. War is not going to happen immediately. And war is not going to happen the way we are used to thinking of a war. Large-scale army movements taking place like that. There is a nuclear umbrella on top of both the countries. There has to be a way for India, if it wants to, and that is what they want to. Because breaking up Pakistan, unfortunately, we don't understand that. Now we start getting it, that Indian plans and the whole thing is much bigger than what we normally used to give them the credit for. The plans are to make Pakistan what they think it should have been, just a passage through to and from the Central Asian Republics, Afghanistan, etc., etc.
Right.
Now, with that kind of a thought process, it's going to take over a period of time. It's not going to happen just tomorrow or day after.
Right, but
the build-up when the need will happen.
The build-up yet continues.
At what is called a piecemeal approach, pushing Pakistan back, and put one step at a time.
We're running out of time there. Sorry to cut you, General Ghulam. Mustafa, just your closing comments. We've got our last 30 seconds. Major General Ijaz Awan on this thought that how far is India going to take this agenda of creating instability at the risk of millions of lives, especially what we're seeing in Jammu and Kashmir?
This is not going to serve India in any way because of the Civilian Amendment, the Citizen Amendment Act and the abrogation of 370. In Kashmir, there is enough trouble at home for India. And there is no evidence of Pakistan's involvement whatsoever. Pakistan is pursuing a policy of non-interference. Was there any evidence available with India, they would have challenged us at all the forums internationally. So when Pakistan is not interfering, there is much trouble at home. They cannot get into misadventure with Pakistan because in this case, these are two militaries, two armies face to face having a nuclear potential. So they would not like to draw the world attention toward this whole episode where international powers get involved to resolve the conflict or to get involved in diffusing the situation. So it's going to internationalize the already persisting trouble in India to a much higher level and scale, which India cannot afford at this time. That's why I said it is all rhetoric and nothing more.
All right. Thank you so much, Major General Awan, for joining us. Mr. Hassan, Akbar, and of course, Lieutenant General Ghulam, Mustafa, for giving us your take on the latest development from the Indian front, where we were talking about how the new army chief, again, was promoting that kind of aggression that India has been seen recently, being recognized for this constant aggressive moves and warmongering. So with that, we've come to the end of the program. We will see you tomorrow with more news and analysis. Till then, goodbye.